thing they've said.
We've never had it.
Never
How can they
worked.
say it never worked? Because we
We
never had it.
for the we need to say that for the show, so we can go ahead.
Yeah,
and follow that.
I'm gonna ask that question when we. That's what I'm saying. Let you know that that's gonna be what I'm going to ask. And let them get out of here.
And what you talk about, some people, as much as you get on me talking about some people and they and them, where you get off saying some people, who you talking about saying African-centered education doesn't work?
I said that.
You
I
just
said some people say that.
Yeah, who is
And I'm
some
saying some people.
Yeah, just like you always
I
get on
don't-
me when I use the term some people or they.
Well, if you say some, you're still moving beyond they. They could be anybody, but some people is more specific. You follow me?
Of what? Quantitative?
Yeah. we get right on into it. Hey!
Oh, wow. Y'all just woke me up. I was saying, y'all just woke me up.
Hey! Thank you very much, Cedric. Achilles Kerberson. On the board, I'm Wallace Red. And thank you for tuning in. You may call us at 452-3094. In the studio, we've got Miss Pam Brown. We've got Kokayi Ajamu, comrade, I might say. And then we're going to talk about a couple of things. And I'm going to get out of the way and go over my notes. But education, reform for African American children, black children, if you will. Maybe we'll throw some nationalism in the pot as well. But we were talking about a debate / discussion, if you will. I've seen and I've heard, and when I say some people, sometimes I may choose not to call names. But today I will call name. And the most recent debate that I've seen was Pinyanki Bankole of St. Louis County and his friend who agrees with him on everything. And you know what? I don't agree with anyone on anything, not even my wife. And you know what? Tongue and teeth don't agree on everything all the time because they fall out sometime. So something is not going right there. But anyway, they were talking Kokayi about, and I said some people. And if I say they, that is clearly not clear. But if I say some people, I've moved from the they to the some with some description of the people I'm talking about. And sometimes I will say, I'm not going to call any names today, but sometimes I will go ahead and call those names. Depends on whether or not I want to be combative or not. Yes. But anyway, they are saying that this African-centered education has never worked. I won't go so far as to say that they've said it never will work. So I want to ask, I'm going to turn it over to Kokayi to lead the way, and Ms. Pam Brown, a special guest. I'm going to ask both of them, what do you say to those who make this commentary? And let's go to Ms. Pam.
Peace and love, brothers and sisters. This is just, you know, it's hard for me to address the question without saying this first. I don't like to have unintelligent conversations. And so the only person who would say that it has never worked or doesn't work would be a European who doesn't know in the first place and it's not in his or her best interest for it to work. Or an ignorant brother or sister who is brain stained. You know, a lot of us have the melanin, but we have, you know, our brains are not there.
Okay.
However, I will say that It does work. I bear witness that it works. I had a school for 16 years, and that's what we did, and it works. And when I come across those children today who are now adults and have children of their own, they thank me. And they not only thank me because they were reading in preschool and pre-K, reading fluently, 2nd, 3rd grade level at 4 and 5 years old, but also what comes to mind is an inbox I got on Facebook from one of my former students who now has 3 children, and last year, and she said, I just finished teaching my children about the Nguzo Saba, which is the 7 principles of Kwanzaa, and she said, thank you, you know, because so many people don't know that. And so they grew up in an environment where they were not only getting advanced academics, but they were also getting information about who they were and whose they are, which makes them automatically, you know, sometimes I get accused of being arrogant, and one of the reasons is that I know what blood is flowing through my veins. You know, I know who I am. And so so nobody can tell me I'm less than or devalue me because I know. And education is about programming. And so if you have a choice whether to program people to feel less than or better than, give me the better than. And that's what African-centered education does. And it does work, it always has. And anyone who would say elsewise is just unintelligent.
Okay, and African-centered education, repeat, you said, gives you the better than. And I'm saying better than, better in everything, better quality, better, etc. Okay.
Absolutely, knowing that you're better than. And the reason it's important for us not to just say you're as good as. You can't tell an African child today in this climate that you're as good as a European. You have to teach truth. You're better than.
Okay.
And that's what needs to be done. Because they are teaching, why would we teach we're the same when they're teaching that they're better than?
Okay.
So in order to combat that damage, that psychological damage that's being done by being in a classroom every day, all day, being taught that you're less than, then you need to be taught that you're better than, which is the truth.
Okay. Kokayi, what is African-centered education?
Well, I think Queen Mother over here described it in terms of how it works eloquently. I think that when you posed the question about better than, it was specifically meant to the subject matter of our children being taught that they were less than. So Queen Mother was explaining that we need to teach our children that they're better than.
Okay.
And I agree wholeheartedly because in my experience, just doing my own homeschooling and teaching young men about who they are, the minute they began to learn that they were someone special, they became avid readers. They became historians. They became better fathers. They became real men with character because they were encouraged by the new information that they were receiving. That beforehand, it was all demonized information about themselves. They were talked down to, and I think if I have my brother correctly, I don't want to misquote his name, but a long time ago, well, not in my lifetime, I ran across a gentleman in Washington, D.C., and the first thing he said to me that I took with me the rest of my life was that if you remember, and I think I mentioned this last week, when you look at children going to school, 3 and 4 years old, you drop them off at daycare in the 5th grade, white or black, they're knowing that the legs of their mother is crying because they don't want to be left alone. They don't want to be left there without that guiding force, that strong backbone there with them. And so they cry, white and black children. But as they go through 12 years of indoctrination, white children leave with their heads held up high, proud to be white. And our children come out with their heads held down, with low self-esteem, not liking anything about themselves, not knowing who they are. And I think any adult, grown adult, be it a teacher in school, a professor in college, that has children go through their course and they come out not knowing who they are, they should be ashamed of themselves. I don't care if they're black or white. They should be ashamed of themselves if our children go to them to learn and they don't know who they are when they leave. And as one of our principles of the Guzman Salva states, and as a matter of fact, in the African Creed, we want to make sure that we leave our heritage better off than when we receive it.
That's right.
You know, and so we should take that in consideration when we're raising and educating our children. We want to make sure that they are better off than when they first met us. And that's when we brought them to the world. And so African-centered education is just structured simply to build that foundation and to promote the advancement of our people.
Okay, and certainly I don't see anything wrong with it. I have not heard anything that I personally disagree with at this point. But I will say this: that there is no discussion, intellectual discussion, historically, social, economically, that the Love Power Show will shy away from. None. And if you come to me saying that with the negative or the positive, then specifically we will engage in the positives and the negatives. And if the show or I am for it, then we will improve upon it. Today, on the Love Power Show, we will be talking about education reform for African American children, black children, if you will. We will be using much of Dr. Claude Anderson's work, straight from his book. We'll be using other documents as well as we talk about education reform. So please tune in. I'm going to let you all have it. Take it away. Nationalism, education. I'm going to step out and let you all take it forward. I thank you for being a part of the Love Power Show. Do come back in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Yes.
Thank you for having us. I do want to mention something, bring something up, Ms. Brown, because Wallace Red mentioned they're going to be talking about education reform. And I'm a firm believer that when you talk about reform, you're talking about maintaining what you have and just trying to make some adjustments in the midst of it to make it feel more comfortable and more acceptable. And I don't think for our children we need to be reforming anything. We need to do away with the whole system and start from scratch with what our queen mothers and ancestors and our people have decided to use to raise our children in the right direction. And I think that if we're going to do anything positive with African-centered education, number one, it's going to be outside of the box. Number two, they're not going to want it to exist. Number three, they're going to create obstacles and hurdles to keep us from doing it. And they're going to make it financially difficult to maintain it so that it'll be perpetually in motion to continue to teach our children.
I totally agree. I think that when you were talking, there's a place in the Bible where it talks about pouring new wine into an old flask. And so why would we want to deal with the foundation? It's European, it's negative. The foundation needs to come out and needs to be rebuilt from the beginning. And it needs to be based on who we are, what we value. As I've said previously on this show, just understanding that in our culture, and this is what you have to, this is what I've been taught by the great scholars and as well as activists. Our foundation and who we are, our culture says that the group is more important than the individual. So what I want personally cannot take precedence over what's best for the group. That's critical, because the other people, they're the exact opposite. What I want individually is more important than what's best for the group. So we have to create an education system that is based on who we are and what our culture is, which is almost is the opposite. And so we're sending our children into a danger zone, a war zone, every day. They will not, how would you, it's kind of like when you're in a relationship, generally you should not be willing to do any more for the other person than they are willing to do for you. Because there has to be balance, and we're about that mind, we're about that balance. And again, they are not. And so why would we send our children to them when they will not send their children to us? Some of this is just common sense. And so when we talk about reform, I think that before we get to talking about reform, I think that there is a lot of confusion out there, in fact, about just what we're talking about. I want to do, and I'm going to read a little, stop a little, and have conversation, if that's okay with you. One of the pieces I brought with me today was a paper that I wrote some years ago called Separate and Equal, because I believe separate is equal, and the role of the Black Power movement in the emergence of the African-centered education movement. And what I did was, I researched Black organizations like the Nation of Islam, the Black Panthers, all these different organizations, to see if they had a position and what their position was on African-centered education. And what I found out is that a big reason why African-centered education came to be was because as these different, if you will, Black Power groups were established, they were realizing that education was a key element. In all of the fighting that we were doing, education was a key element. The time, in my opinion, that we spent worrying about sitting next to somebody at a lunch counter or being able to go to their schools was time wasted, because we should have been keeping things separate, because now in hindsight, we realize that opening up, us being able to go to European businesses killed our businesses, killed our communities. Once we can move out of our communities, then you see what happened to our communities, because you no longer had everybody in the community. The people who could, because of the self-hatred that we had, we ran away from our people. And so then you have communities where everybody is on the same level, so you can't walk around like you could previously as a child and see a doctor and a lawyer and a this and a that, a teacher in your community. Like when I was growing up, I'm 56 years old, so when I was growing up, everybody pretty much, was in our community. But over time, it's changed more and more, because we begin to feel important and we run away from our people. And so now today, as a result, what we have is, when you listen to African Americans of a certain socioeconomic level, when you hear them talk about our people, they talk about them in the same spirit that the Europeans do, as if they are better. Because they have, begun to believe the hype. Carter G. Woodson said that the root of the problem in miseducation of the Negro, he said the root of the problem is the highly educated Negro, because he doesn't know how to go through the academy, get what you can that resonates with you and that makes sense, and leave that other stuff alone, and bring what you did learn back to your community that can be helpful to your community, to build your community. Instead, we have people who go and they believe the hype, and they're being, totally Europeanized, and so then they can't be a help to their community. And so that's why we get to the situation we're in now. So when we talk about education reform, there's only one way for us to reform it, and that is to create separate systems. Separate is equal. That's the name of my paper. Separate is equal, because we have two different agendas and we're two different people. And I don't mean that math is not math and science is not science and all of that. But if you're learning math and you're assuming that everything, you only hear about the Europeans who contributed, then math is not just math. Math is becomes a self-esteem building piece. Science is not just science if you only learn about European scientists. And you learn about them creating everything, which half of the things they didn't create in the first place, they just didn't allow us to get patents. And so they took credit. So it's critical for us when we talk about reform. We can't talk about education reform without talking about making it be to the advantage of our children in the same way their education is to the advantage of their children and to the demise of us as a society. So I think that is just critical. I know that there are people who would disagree, and I was sharing with the brother before we came on air about I've been in situations where I was teaching, and I walked in the classroom, and I have a piece that I say when I introduce myself. My name is Ms. Brown, and I could be anywhere doing anything, but I'm here today with you because I love black children. And I honestly have had, brother, black children to say to me, elementary school children, well, even high school and junior high, you don't love white children. And I'm just like, what, why are we even, I'm talking to you all, why are we even, and then they say, oh, you racist, and then the whole class, ooh, and I'm just like, wow, they are being indoctrinated. This is in Chicago, Illinois now, okay? So they are being indoctrinated in these schools that I can't even say to a group of black children, I'm here because I love you. That's serious. And this is why we need African-centered education, because the teachers need to be telling the children every day, I love you because you look like me. There's nothing wrong with it. I love you because you're melanated and you're special, and I know what blood is running through your veins, etc., etc. It's nothing wrong with that. So, yeah, we need reform, and it doesn't just start with the curriculum. It starts with the teachers, actually, because we can't assume that because a person is black that they know anything about black culture, because that's not what we live. I have people every day to look at my Ankh ring and say, that's a beautiful cross. And I'm like, wow, do you think I would be wearing around that's like wearing a electric chair. When I see people with crosses, it's like wearing, because that's an instrument of death, And so, no, this is about life. I would not have on a huge cross. But my point is, or even that, a cowrie shell, or just basic things that they have no knowledge of. And it's important that we do know. It's important, even going on to technology and who gave the technology for the cell phone and the internet and those kinds of things. Or even the fact that there are African children right now who are being enslaved to get the mineral that we need for this technology. And they're not being paid, and if they don't pull enough of this mineral out of the ground for the technology, they are beaten. They sometimes have fingers cut off. This is going on today. So we cannot be so removed from who we are and what we are going through. And I think it's critical. I don't think there's anything more important than that we should be working on, actually. The education piece and the economics piece. I've talked too much. I'm listening to you.
No, I mean, I'm in total agreement with you. I think we do not veer off the same opinion when it comes to raising our children and educating our children. One of the things I've recognized, being one of those people that believe that we need to have our own nation, because everything starts from the ownership of the land.
Absolutely.
And anything above the land comes from the land. So if you don't own it, you don't own anything above it. And that includes institutions such as schools, hospitals, or whatever institution is developed off of that land. But and so when we talk about the educational institution, it all stems, in my humble analysis and belief, from economics. Our children are some of the most brilliant children in the world, but yet from day one they have to deal with economic difficulties. And what I mean by that, in our own experience, when you talk about the schools in our neighborhoods, in our communities, they're always the one that's less funded. If you don't have the funds, then in turn you have the worst resources to teach your children. You don't have the best books. You don't have the best equipment. And so, based on that economic difficulty, you tend to get teachers who are paid less. And what ends up happening is that the teachers that are paid less, that comes into your community to teach your children, are inferior teachers for the most case, because the ones that have the education to, or the ability to teach our children the best, will not come there because the money is not right. So now you have inferior teachers giving our children inferior education. So we come out with inferior education. And then we're wondering why our children are turning out the way they're turning out. But the first thing Europeans and anyone that has been indoctrinated by Europeans say is that it's the parents' fault. To a certain degree, parents do have a responsibility to raising and educating their children. But based on our history here and our predicament in this system here, we have to understand that if you give your car to a mechanic for 10 hours a day or 12 hours a day, and you give your car to the mechanic to fix the tire, and after the 12 hours they come back with no tires, the windshield broke, the motor is removed, is that my responsibility when I turned it over to the mechanic? See, we have been indoctrinated so much that we put more value on the car, and we say, well, you know, it's not my fault, it's the mechanic's fault because I left it in his hands. But when you leave your children in the hands of your enemy to raise and teach for 12 hours a day, you don't have the intestinal fortitude to say that system that they've been in for 12 hours have ruined your kid, your children. We have a responsibility. The first responsibility is that we need to take them out of that system.
Absolutely.
And we need to begin taking on ownership and responsibility of educating and raising our own children. But we have to understand through history, we automatically began to think it's normal for us to turn our children over to our enemy so that they can educate them or miseducate them, if you will. And that's a part of the problem. So we're 5, 6, 7 generations of new African people, black people, that are conditioned to think it's normal to turn your children over to your enemy and take the blame that they're running around with their pants hanging down and they don't have any respect for the lives of their own brothers and sisters that look like them, when we have a great example of who is responsible for them coming out like that.
Absolutely.
And so I you know, and I'm with you, the foundation is ruined.
Absolutely.
I don't think we're going to be able to get much out of this system trying to reform it. I'm with you, sister. We have to separate and begin to start from scratch on how we're going to educate our children.
I totally agree. I always say to people when I'm talking about the cultural connection and trying to get people to come on board to make this a community effort to begin and let this be the first, not the only, but the first African-centered non-public school that the community supports. I talk to them about, you know, the first thing we look at is the board members. You know, who are the city school, the public school board members, and why aren't they having us, and when I say us, I mean the community, to get in our cars and go to Nashville and say, you cannot continue to send less money to us, to our communities and our schools, and underfund our schools, and then when you go to East Memphis, it's a whole different thing. You cannot continue to do that. And we need to understand that all of this is some people think it's impossible. All you have to do is keep the children at home. You know, when I was growing up, we had Black Fridays, Black Mondays, one day a week, keep your child at home. If your child does not come, they do not get paid. If they do not get paid, they become unhappy, and all of a sudden they will listen to you. You know, you just have to understand how to get their attention, and all of a sudden they're listening to you. And then you can say, this is what we want, this is what we want, this is what we want. So we have to be willing, you know, everything in life comes down to how bad do you want it. So how bad do we want it? How important is it to us? But when you're dealing with a population such as, you know, in Memphis, where you have so many people, the average family who has children in the public school system is operating off $10,000 a year. That's not even $1,000 a month, brother. That's extreme poverty. So it's unlikely that we will be able to get people on that level of poverty without lots of work to understand the need to even go to Nashville and try to make a change. But there are those of us who know better, and those of us who know better should do what? We should do better. So maybe we don't get en masse, but maybe we at least start showing up at the school board meetings and getting, you know, you can only sign up for, 3 minutes or some foolishness. They work for us, but we can only talk to them for 2 minutes. That whole thing is messed up. But anyway, we used to do back in the day, and we take 10, 15 people down there, and everybody gets up and we're talking about the same thing because we're in unison. We're in unison. What are we doing to fight the situation and to make it better? You know, because there's nothing new under the sun, which means there's nothing new we can come up with. There are no new problems either. So it's not rocket science. So we have to be willing to do those things. Also, we have to begin again to act as a people. And what I mean by that, I spoke on earlier to some extent. You know, we get a little something and we get important. And so we don't want to deal with our brothers and sisters who have been lost in the shuffle, you know, for all kinds of reasons. But a lot of the reason starts with the education piece, because if you can't read, and I've worked, you know, with adults who cannot read, the level of embarrassment, the level of fear that you walk around with every day because you're afraid you're going to get in a situation where you're going to need to read, and it's embarrassing. So we can't wait for other people to start programs. I envision having community service centers all over the city where people can come in and they can get some food, they can get some clothes, and they can get some help.